Hello, I'm Matthew Sheehan. I'm the producer of the World Sailing Show here at Sunset and Vine. Among the many topics that we cover, around the world racing is very popular, and the Volvo Ocean race is one of the most famous. But it's a race that's going through a number of changes. And as we looked back at archive footage to cover that story in the February show, we were struck by just how incredible the last race was. In fact, we were drawn in so much that we decided to pull it all together and make a feature out of the whole thing. So here it is. We pick up the story with the incredible rebuild of the entire fleet of the new boats.
40,000 miles, flat out, around the world. Always raced, always rallied, and always with the accelerator pressed firmly to the floor. The Volvo Ocean race boats had a tough life last time round. Crews did their best to stay on top of routine maintenance and repairs.
You know what they say? A good guess is better than a bad measure.
Some boats were pushed harder than others and faced a bigger task to get their show back on the road. A tough life was what the identically matched Volvo 65s were designed for. But a high-mileage, pre-owned machine that has been flogged for 9 months by a crew on a mission might not be your first choice for a second lap of the planet. Yet this is exactly what is in store for teams in the next race. A race that will break new ground for an offshore fleet of high-tech, carbon fibre rocket ships. Of the 8 boats that will be on the start line this November, only one is brand new. And yet so far, none of the teams that competed in the last race have chosen the boat in the new wrapper, or indeed the boat that won the last race. Such is the confidence they have in the fully refitted fleet. Nick Bice describes himself as
Chief Technical Development Officer. I gave myself that name.
To everyone else, he's the boss. And the founder of the Boatyard. But whatever his title, Bice and his team broke new ground in the last race with a bold experiment. To maintain the entire 7-boat fleet with one shoreside operation that followed the race. A touring pit lane for the Volvo 65s. And a first for the offshore racing world.
So the Boatyard started off pre the 2014-15 race with the plan to help reduce the team's overall budget by offering services, pooling the spares, by basically grouping all those things that teams were doing individually to try and reduce that overall budget but not having an effect on the actual team's performance.
Like asking Formula One drivers to hand their keys to Bernie Ecclestone for a service and valet before the next Grand Prix. The plan was a bold one. Yet this is precisely what Bice's team did.
We had a pretty special system set up from the between the shore managers and us, being the Boatyard, and the suppliers as well. Essentially, the boat could send a job list to the shore manager. The shore manager would then input it into what we call a smart sheet, and that would generate reports that get sent to either the head of the department or the actual supplier in anticipation for what is coming up for the next stopover. We were servicing the boats for the leg coming up. So we were proactively servicing, not reactively servicing. So we gather that was around 95% of the servicing done was proactive and only 5% reactive. One design boats that gave us the opportunity to be as open booked as we wanted. And those job lists that were being sent off the boats, I would print them out and stick them up in the Boatyard for the public to even see. So everyone knew exactly what was going on. In the past, it was an advantage or not, I'm not entirely sure, to keep secrets. And sometimes the boats arrive at the dock with the shore crew not knowing what to do because it's been such a secret.
But there are no secrets about what happens for the next race. The Volvo 65s were designed to do 2 races. Getting them ready for another circumnavigation involves stripping all 7 of the existing boats back to their birthday suits and rebuilding them from scratch. a €1 million refit per boat.
We've basically rebuilt the boats in this group refit that we've done in Lisbon this time round. We've done a lot of changes, but we haven't fundamentally changed the performance. We got rid of a fair bit of weight off the boat, to be honest. We could have spent a lot of money trying to put lifting foils on a boat that's a bit heavy, and it didn't seem the right thing to go and spend another $1 million on something that would give a 5% gain or something when it's one design. It's not the bit that's going to change whether it's a successful race or not.
But before they could rebuild the fleet, they had to build themselves a facility that could handle 7 large race boats in a row. No easy task. The answer was a disused fishery in Lisbon, converted into the Volvo pit lane and made ready for the Grand Prix production line.
So yeah, day one of this boat's refit, disassembly, where we've lifted the boat out of the water, taken the mast out, and we're going to set up to take the boat off the keel now.
So this boat now is in its 3rd week inside this bay. The boat builders are still doing some modifications to this boat, and the painters are getting all the paint off the deck, and they're going to start sanding the hull to get a bit ahead for when it rolls into the painting booth.
Now it takes 5 days to strip a boat when it comes into the first bay, and at this point in the process, now that we know it, it's probably 60% of the time it would take to do it if you were just, here's a container full of parts and let's start putting things together. So just every 3 weeks another one rolls out, and it feels like you just got done with a tire change and here comes the B car in for a fresh set.
The hardest bit is probably the shaping of the boat. So once we've stripped off all the old branding, we then go into, we put the materials back on the primers, and then we go into the shaping where we use big long drain pipes with sandpaper on, 4 guys all together like this, and just sand and shape the whole boat up. That takes us about 3 days to do that, but that's probably the hardest bit.
A lot goes on in this bay. Every single component that was taken off the boat has been serviced and is now going back on. It's also getting tested, so every single department has a go on here. This boat's coming out of the spray booth in 3 days' time, and as you can see, it's looking very red, so you can guess which boat it is, but they've still got to do the final coat on it, they've still got to do the non-skid on the deck, and they've still got to paint a few components, all that in 3 days. So it's a massive, massive show of teamwork effort in here at the moment.
That red boat was Mapfre, one of the first to be relaunched in her new colours, ready for testing and crew trials. But despite the intense level of scrutiny, sometimes not everything goes to plan. Shortly after she was relaunched, Mapfre broke her mast during an offshore training run. A frustrating and acute reminder of the fine line that teams tread.
There's only one good thing. Nobody got hurt.
But sometimes the failures are intentional.
It's very uncommon to have the chance to destroy something that someone else has built so carefully and so accurately. But this time we broke this carbon part for something worth.
While reliability is key, so too is the need to ensure that the fleet is evenly matched.
The current boat that we're sitting on, which is fully ready to go, weighs around 12.5 tonnes. And the difference across the fleet between the 8 boats is 36 kilograms only on the whole boat. And that 36 kilograms then actually gets corrected, so when the boats are actually sailing, the boats weigh exactly the same. So the performance from the boats comes purely from the crew. For the next edition of the race, these boats will be about 2 knots quicker. Now that's actually due to going to the Southern Ocean and sailing downwind and in different wind strengths. There's a whole new sail wardrobe being added to the boats, which is a refined wardrobe from the last edition, from what the designers have learnt. So the boats will be quicker from that point of view.
Each boat has taken 6,000 man-hours to refit, during which time over 750 parts have been removed, serviced and refitted. By the time the last boat has been launched, the Lisbon boatyard will have clocked up a total of 42,000 man-hours to produce a fleet that is fit for another flat-out lap of the planet. Seven identical boats, 7 hungry teams. Among them, 14 crew who have won the event before. Every team bar one has at least one crew member that has tasted Volvo victory. There are 5 Olympic gold medal winners in the fleet and 9 America's Cup victories. The message is clear. The 2017 Volvo Ocean race fleet is awash with talent. This will be the second time that the Volvo 65s have been used for the race, and the knowledge as to how to make them go quickly has been shared around the fleet. Evidence that points to this being the closest race in the 45-year history of the event. This month, we take a close look at the teams and the key players in our guide and rankings ahead of the start. The 7-boat fleet can be split into 3 groups. First, the front runners. Starting with skipper Xabi Fernandez, you could list the entire team as key players. It's what makes them the favourites. But particular focus will be on how 49er world champion and America's Cup winner Blair Tuke fares, along with Olympic gold medalist Tamara Echegoyen. Charles Caudrelier came close to victory last time around, and with navigator Pascal Bidigori with him again, the team is among the favourites. Only 2 of their crew are new to the Volvo. Jérémy Bayou is one of the world's top solo offshore sailors, and Marie Riou is a 4-time NACRA 17 world champion. Runners-up last time, skipper Bao Becking and navigator Andrew Cape have more Volvo round-the-world experience than the rest of their crew put together. Among the Volvo first-timers, America's Cup winning helmsman Peter Burling will be a focus of attention. This race sees several key changes. At 45,000 miles, it's the longest in the history of the event, and includes a return to long Southern Ocean legs. The opening stages have changed too. Leg 1 takes the fleet from Alicante to Lisbon via a number of turning points. Then it's the big one, 7,000 miles from Lisbon to Cape Town, South Africa. A leg that puts real pressure on the teams. While the next group is stacked with talent, they've spent less time training afloat, but only a fool would write them off. Previously with Alba Medica, skipper Charlie Enright and Mark Towell are back again under a different team name. Their solid crew includes navigator Simon Fisher, Phil Harmer, Damien Foxall and Tony Mutter, who have all won previous Volvos. Just a week before the start, news broke that Simeon Tienpont would no longer skipper the team. Instead, Brad Jackson would take the reins. A cool-headed Kiwi with 6 previous races under his belt, Jackson is a safe pair of hands. Navigator Jules Salter and Jocko Signorini are from the same mould, with 3 races apiece to their names. Among the newcomers, Olympic gold medalist Martine Grael will be the focus of attention. While the boats are the same, the crew makeup is different this time. A new rule on crew gender has provided an incentive for teams to be mixed. And for the first time, there are women in all of the teams. There's also a great deal of Olympic experience in the fleet. A distinct advantage when it comes to close quarters racing.
This is home for me. I'm normally doing these import nearly races in my 49er. It's kind of the same thing, so I definitely feel comfortable and confident more than the big ocean thing. That's the guys are definitely used to that.
You could argue that all of these boats here are more equal than the 49ers that we race at the Olympics. You know, we would be pretty comfortable to jump on someone else's boat and be straight away in tune. At the end of the day, it's your sailing skills which are gonna, and your way you set up the boats and trim the sails and all of that, that is the difference. So yeah, I think that predominantly is where Olympic class sailors are best.
final group were the last to the party. These teams will start the event playing catch-up, but there's still plenty to impress in their crew lineups. The combination of Dee Caffari and offshore rock star Brian Thompson makes for an accomplished foundation for this team. Combined with Martin Stromberg and Liz Wardley, there's further depth to the crew. Caffari has created the biggest sailing squad of the fleet, where the balance between male and female sailors will be 50-50. Straight-talking David Witt is back in the Volvo Ocean race after a 20-year absence. He's joined by Steve Hales, who, with 5 previous races to his name, is the most experienced on board. But Luke Parkinson knows what victory looks like, having won the last race aboard Abu Dhabi. So what will make for ultimate success? Caudrelier believes there is a new focus for the next race.
I think last time we were the first one to really take the inshore seriously at the beginning. Sometimes the inshore leg is like the start of a race, so and because the difference are so small, it's very important to lead at the first mark. So I think everybody take it more seriously now.
So over the next 9 months, the action that decides the final outcome could happen much closer to the shore.
Until the end, until the final blow of the whistle, sound of the horn, we will fight, we will conquer, emerge victorious, we are the champions. Nah.
The opening leg to Lisbon in the Volvo Ocean race was a short hop compared to the 45,000 miles that lay ahead. But it was a stressful one for the teams. The scramble to get out of the Mediterranean after the start from Alicante saw the fleet stick together. But Vestas 11th Hour Racing were happy to break from the pack. And their early confidence paid off.
To be honest, before the leg I was quite apprehensive about how this leg was going to play out, because I remember from the 2015 race how many times the whole fleet just flipped inside out leaving out the Med, so we knew it was important to have a strong strategy leaving.
And it worked. As strong easterly winds provided a slingshot for the teams, it was Vestas that led the charge, leaving the race favourites struggling to keep the pace.
Until Gibraltar, all the fleet didn't sail very properly before Gibraltar and stay together and make the wrong choice to go to the south. And Vestas did something very simple. We all have very similar speed, and sometimes it's difficult to make the break.
So too was keeping the lead as the breeze went light. Yet Vestas kept their advantage to take the first offshore victory in the 11-leg race.
It's a leg kind of unlike any other leg in the race, really, until we get back into Europe in 9 months' time. So having sailed 1,500 miles, 10% of the points have already been awarded. We're glad to have them go the way they went.
An early boost for the team, and a reminder as to how tight the racing would be.
This race is going to be exceptionally tight. I mean, all the teams are good. I think this race is a little deeper than the last race, and then to have the talent from all the other boats in the last race kind of filtered amongst the current teams, you kind of lose some of the boat speed edges that people had in the past, and everybody's kind of raised their game together.
If the strong breeze through the Straits of Gibraltar had thrown teams in at the deep end, the opening stages of the 7,000-mile leg 2 from Lisbon to Cape Town was a baptism of fire. 4 days of full-on downwind racing at a relentless pace.
They were just sending it the other way.
The last few hours have been really tough.
Well, that's a bummer.
Whether it's white or brown or small or big, nothing good ever comes of a cloud.
Trying to avoid the big nosedive.
Having the time of my life.
The Volvo Ocean race was living up to its reputation. But this edition of the event also stands out for the wide range of talent and experience among the teams. Among the crew lists, some have a string of world titles. Some have America's Cup victories to their name. Some have Olympic gold medals around their necks. Some have all of the above. And one discovered he had even more.
We've got some great news that's just come in from Peter Burling's parents. It was World Saver of the Year award last night. Peter has won the award. He doesn't know yet, so we're going to go and give him the news. You've got to read this.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, it's been a really cool year up in Bermuda, and now it's just awesome to get the accolade. But now we're just pushing hard here. Struggling a bit at the moment, but it's alright.
I'm absolutely thrilled for him. Couldn't be happier.
Ever the diplomat, ever the competitor. Life offshore is Burling's new world. And he's not alone. This edition of the race stands out for the new wave of young, accomplished sailors that have joined the teams. Many are less decorated than Burling, but they're just as hungry to learn.
I think the appeal for me was it was a completely different challenge. I love Olympic sailing, but I also find it really tough. I'm very stressed all the time, and there's a huge amount of pressure on myself as an individual to perform well. I really enjoyed the team environment on the boat, and it just opened my eyes to something that I hadn't even considered. It's definitely daunting. My longest offshore had been the prologue from Lisbon to Alicante, which was 4 days of light winds, nice weather. 3 weeks plus on the boat, that's going to be really tough.
My offshore experience started in maybe June, July this year, a couple of months after the Cup. I think the biggest learning curve for me has been just managing myself offshore, managing the sleeping, managing the eating. So then when you get on deck and you're there to make the boat go fast, you can do it.
I think there's massive similarities in some aspects of this racing. Managing your own expectations, helping to manage other people's expectations, and all of the technical skills. I think obviously on a much smaller scale, it's the same sport. Olympic sailing has set me up quite nicely for transition into this kind of racing.
To start with, I didn't know what I can put into the team, and I think slowly I'm getting there. And I've obviously done a lot of races, imports and tactics with boat on boat. But I'm still struggling to look out of the boat still, because I'm too focused in the maneuvers and making sure I do my job right. So for me it's been a hard part now, but I think with time we'll get better.
And while many would agree, the benefits of an Olympic medal hasn't always provided an instant advantage.
The first few days were pretty wet and windy. And I have to say, in the first day I was like, what am I doing here? But then it got pretty nice. Close to the trade winds is always nice.
Mapfre's skipper believes there's a different reason to take these newcomers offshore.
I think it's not a matter of new generation of sailors, I think it's just a matter of very good sailors. Of course helps to have people always, talking in the meetings, not just listening, and people bringing a new point of view, and this just open-minded, is very important.
As the fleet crossed the equator and the newcomers were subjected to King Neptune's induction,
Half check with you! Remember, he was a handsome man!
The racing remained as intense as everyone had expected. After 10 days, just 65 miles separated the front from the back of the fleet. Leg 2 of the Volvo Ocean race from Lisbon to Cape Town had been tough. For the new crew, this was their longest time at sea by far. For navigators, the 19-day leg had been intense and stressful.
We're just off the Brazilian coast, probably 400 miles.
There's been a little bit of a high pressure ridge, and it's forcing us a little bit further to the west.
Bit of snakes and ladders, bit of back and forth, bit of bungee cord,
Conditions are constantly changing, especially here in these trade winds where it can easily go from 10 to 20 knots of wind.
The race south to the equator from Lisbon had been close, the fleet barely out of sight of each other. Once in the southern hemisphere, a large area of light winds ahead blocked their path, forcing the fleet to stay west.
Just sort of can't shake them off at the moment, they keep coming at us, but that's alright. Good
two-boat testing.
Every time they've come within distance, we've let them get away, so we're determined to keep them this time.
Timing the turn to the east would be critical.
Fought so hard, being off the pace to stay in the game, don't want to just make a rash decision and throw it away. So it's a difficult time.
How do you really think we should drive?
Okay, let's drive.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to drive. How was it?
Decision made. Jibing.
When they did, the reach across the South Atlantic provided a soaking, high-speed taste of the infamous Southern Ocean. The tactical challenge off the South American coast had seen Mapfre come out on top as they led into Cape Town.
Super happy. This is, for us, first leg was very good already, being second in Lisbon. But of course, it's winning here and winning the first big, long leg is very happy, very proud of.
Behind them, Dong Feng heaved a sigh of relief, having pulled themselves back from fourth after tripping up at the turn to take second.
It's a nice second place after what happened. Made a big mistake. We did complicated thing to take the lead, and we just saw a stupid thing.
Next across the line was Vestas 11th Hour Racing, taking third. From here, the focus turned to leg 4. 6,500 miles from Cape Town to Melbourne, Australia, across the wastes of the Southern Ocean.
I never sailed in the Southern Ocean, will be the first time, so I'm quite anxious and nervous. Never experienced so much cold that I think I will experience now. So I hope that I'm ready, all my kit is ready, and I will trust on that.
All the people told me that the South Ocean is hard, but it's amazing too. I know that sometimes it's dangerous because of the strong condition, but I think that I'm in an experienced team, so I'm safety with them, so I'm not worried about this. But yes, I have a little tip that I'll tell you in Australia. Not now. It's a secret.
As they contemplated what lay ahead, some took time to visit the first key landmark of the leg, the Cape of Good Hope.
Certainly leaving the loved ones and mum and talking to them the last time before you head off to a leg like this. It's you do have second thoughts about what you're going through, what you're putting them through, at the same time as you're doing the thing you love, and everyone's always saying make sure you wear your harness, be safe, wear your life jacket, and those are the things that are going through your head when you're going through these manoeuvres and you're up on the foredeck with your harness on, your life jacket on, you make sure you clip on, because you literally hear that coming through your head, that someone in the back of your mind saying be safe, because it does get pretty ropey up there.
Bom, eu acho que essa perna vai ser muito mais dura do que a outra perna que a gente fez, e vai ser desafio mental, sanidade física e mental de conviver a bordo com condições tão extremas. E para mim vai ser uma das pernas mais icônicas do Oceano do Sul, no Mar Austral, onde grandes velejadores são forjados.
Been told by all the veterans, all the legends, this is going to be the hardest leg that I'll ever do. Going straight into this leg, knowing that it's going to be cold, it's going to be wet, it's going to be a lot of hard work and not much sleep. The Southern Ocean's kind of got this ominous feel about it, that you don't really know what it's going to be like until you're there.
As the start loomed, the tension built as the weather predictions filtered through.
Leg 3 is shaping up right now to be a true, proper Southern Ocean leg. The Cape Town exit is not too dissimilar to what we had last time that we were here. So there's no easing into leg 3. It's full on, straight from the beginning. These guys will be 30 to 40 knots at times. Everything that you hear about the Southern Ocean, for big breeze, big waves, cold air, cold water, it's all going to be there, and it's all going to be straight in their face right from the beginning.
And it was. The opening conditions were just as brutal as the forecast suggested, as the fleet punched its way upwind. But there was far more to come. A weather bomb was developing astern as vicious winds of 40 to 60 knots driving 10 to 15 metre seas approached from behind. From a high-speed, relentless blast through the freezing wastes of the Southern Ocean to a crawl in the oppressive heat of the windless Pacific doldrums. And then drama. 2 legs and 4 weeks of extremes lay ahead for the Volvo Ocean race teams, where the results told part of the tale. From the familiar front runners dominating the racing in leg 3, to a complete shake-up on leg 4 from Melbourne to Hong Kong, where the fleet turned inside out. Physically and mentally, the last month has been testing.
It was a really, really tough leg, an absolute classic Southern Ocean, just brutal, relentless Southern Ocean weather.
The action started with the 6,500-mile Southern Ocean leg from Cape Town to Melbourne. The shortest route meant going as far south as possible, but with an exclusion zone set by the race committee to keep the fleet away from the ice, the deep south was out of bounds. The result? A jibing match along the edge of the invisible touchline. But in winds of 30 to 50 knots, more manoeuvres meant more risk. Axo Noble was the first to trip up in a big way after a crash jibe left them with a damaged mast. As they throttled back to make repairs, they hemorrhaged miles to their competitors.
The worst part is we've pulled the track off the back of the mast. So the plan is hopefully get the track glued back on or screwed back on. Then we've got to repair some battens, some mainsail. We're trying to keep the boat moving as fast as possible now, but you know, we only just got a jib up. Still probably doing 16 knots in 45 knots of wind.
The breezy and brutal conditions were also taking their toll on the crew. Whether they were being battered by the tons of water firing through the cockpit, or had been thrown around the boat with the violent motion, there were injuries aplenty. Among those to suffer badly was Team Brunel's Annie Lush, who suffered broken bones in her foot and back. Meanwhile, leading the charge, Mapfre and Dongfeng continued their familiar duel at the front of the fleet. And when Mapfre broke free to head north for the finish, it was clear they'd timed their turn to perfection. Capitalising on a better wind direction, they extended their newly gained, narrow lead on Dongfeng. 3 days later, Mapfre took the leg win, their second of the race so far.
Well, super physical leg this one, been cold, it's been wavy and windy. You know, we have very strong crew, technically and physically as well, and very happy, no injuries, everyone very happy.
Dongfeng, who had limped across the line with a damaged keel canting mechanism, held on to second, while Vestas 11th Hour Racing took third. As the bulk of the fleet prepared for the next leg, Axo Noble was still working their way to the finish. Their crash had been costly. Their Christmas would be at sea. The stopover was short, just 1 week, and the fleet was off once again, this time to Hong Kong. Last in, but first out for leg 4, Axo Noble hugged the Australian coast to lead the charge north. But leading didn't last long for anybody. By the Solomon Islands, Dongfeng was leading the pack, guided by the team's stand-in navigator and former Volvo Ocean Race winner, Frank Camas. But even their lead was short-lived, as the back of the fleet barreled into the front and parked up. Only half the fleet was happy.
The doldrum was the boat come back, so it's a new start again. Since 2 hours we lost all our advantage. That's sometimes very unfair, but we have to cross this doldrum and hope that we will be the first one to exit.
The race was restarting in the doldrums. Scorching temperatures, torrential rain, and spectacular thunderstorms added to the tension. As the breeze began to build, Vestas 11th Hour were first to break free. Could they dare to hope?
All the new breeze is in the north, so if you get down into that wind first, and this guy gets the wind and he starts speeding off, and this guy's still doing 4 knots when this guy's doing 10, you can see it extends.
Yet further to the south, treading their own path, David Witt's son Hung Kai Scallywag had stolen a march on the fleet and taken the lead. First into the trade winds and steaming ahead, but they were about to trip up. During a routine sail change, crew member Alex Goff fell overboard.
Joey went out on the outrigger. I think the sheet was tangled on the end of it, but in those situations you should, one, either be tethered on, or two, at a minimum tell the driver what you're doing so he knows. He didn't do either of those. Went out on the outrigger, I was driving, and he went off a big sea. It just picked the back up and just threw him off like off a horse.
Quick reactions by the crew had him back aboard in 7 minutes. But it had shaken the crew.
4 knots wind and black, you're dead, okay? Only reason we found you is you put your arm in the air, okay?
After their scare, Scallywag was back underway in the best breeze as they led the field to take their first leg victory in their home port of Hong Kong. The script couldn't have been written better.
It's a little bit overwhelming, to be honest. I got interviewed on the boat, and I said, I'd pretty much just give everything up in my sailing career ever if I could pull this off, because it's not just me. It's just going to mean so much to so many people. So it's just fantastic, mate.
But shortly afterwards, the mood in Hong Kong was subdued, following the news that Vestas 11th Hour Racing had been involved in a collision with a fishing boat 30 miles from the finish. A collision that had resulted in a fatality of one of the 10 fishermen aboard. A tragic end to 4 tough and challenging weeks.
We've got a yacht race going on.
Previously in the Volvo Ocean race.
Beautiful Southern Ocean.
Pulled the track off the back of the mast.
See a whale feeding. Oh, that was pretty cool.
This is the scenario what we call the rich get richer.
Only reason we found you is you put your arm in the air.
Since the start in Alicante last October, the pace has been relentless. Long legs, short stopovers, and little time to recover. But as the fleet arrived in Hong Kong after 19,000 miles, the race changed gear. The focus now was on import racing in 2 venues, with a short 100-mile delivery trip in between. Sadly, the celebrations at the end of a challenging leg to Hong Kong from Australia had been overshadowed by the collision between Vestas 11th Hour Racing and a fishing boat that had resulted in a fatality. The team was badly shaken and their boat seriously damaged. According to a statement from the team,
the only viable option was to ship the boat and equipment to New Zealand ahead of the Volvo Ocean race fleet and carry out the necessary repairs there.
Now there were 6. Light and shifty winds made life tricky for navigators and tacticians in the 2 import races in Hong Kong. The results saw the leaderboard reordered, with Dongfeng taking the overall lead in the import series, but only just. Akzo Nobel was quick to take the first win of 2 import races. After a 100-mile delivery trip north to Guangzhou, it was time for another round the boys race, and more light winds. Mapfre was back on top, winning the race and leading the import series once again. Now it was time to change gear as teams prepared for leg 6 to Auckland, New Zealand. A 6,100-mile drag race south, where changing gear at the right time would be critical. Each Each boat is limited to a total of 17 sails for the race, and only 9 are allowed on board for each leg. Picking the right sail combination is key, as is knowing when to change. So what's in a Volvo 65's wardrobe? And how do crews choose? Mapfre's Rob Greenhalgh explains.
Mainsail, obviously everyone has a mainsail, very similar sail to last race. This new one is slightly smaller in the head. J1, so that's our normal conventional jib on the forestay, that's our upwind and reaching sail. We've then got a J2, which is a Solent jib, which stepped back from the forestay. That is for upwind work in windy conditions. We've then got a J3, which people may also call the Genoa staysail, and that essentially acts as a staysail inside spinnakers and inside jibs. We've then got the fractional 0, which is predominantly our reaching sail, so reaching in 12 knots upwards basically, and then as it gets windier you just bear away with that sail until you're running with it in 25 knots of wind. We've then got the masthead 0, which is essentially a bit of a workhorse. That's there to get the boat through the light air. Big, tight luff jib. We've then got our A3, it's a furling spinnaker. That's what we use downwind in, you know, all conditions until it's too windy. Then the new sail they've introduced is the J0, which is basically an upwind jib. Last race we found there was a gap. You know, you'd be on the masthead 0, it would get too much for that, and then you went to the J1 and it was a bit too light for that. So then you might use a fractional sail upwind, and that was a little bit tricky, so J0 is coming into the inventory to fill that upwind gap basically. And it's just up to the teams to figure out how to use it all.
But sail selection wasn't the only critical call that lay ahead. The opening stages of the 6,000-mile leg to Auckland presented some tricky tactical challenges. 2 days into the leg, the Luzon Strait provided the first test. Team Brunel pulled out a slim lead in the punchy conditions. Then came the big gamble as Axo Noble and Team Honkai Scallywag tacked off to the north.
So ultimately this is long-term, trying to hook into that northerly breeze more than anything. So yeah, we in theory will get into that first and then be able to be in a position to use the pressure there to come bows down back at the fleet and over the top of them hopefully.
But it didn't work. 3 days into the leg, both teams were more than 100 miles behind the leaders as the breeze switched off.
This feels wrong. Very wrong.
While further south and in perfect conditions, the front runners were at full pace.
Probably the most water I've seen. Earlier, the driving was like averaging 30, 33 knots of breeze and just jamming into these waves, sort of 25, 26, 28 knots of boat speed. So yeah, probably the most water I've seen, but really, really good fun.
But with over 4,000 miles still to go and the light winds of the doldrums ahead, this leg was a long way from over. Seeing the front runners slow down, Axo Noble and Scallywag altered course to avoid the light weather trap and hauled back their 100-mile deficit before taking the lead. Just as the doldrums had shuffled the pack on the way to Hong Kong, the return trip threatened to do the same. Think stress. And you might think 40 knots, big waves, and the Southern Ocean. But not on this leg. Instead, the real stress came in the last 100 miles to Auckland. The Volvo Ocean race fleet had sailed 27,000 miles of the round-the-world course. But the last 2 legs saw big changes in fortunes. Some very close racing and plenty of stress, especially at the front of the fleet.
It's been a pretty tough day. We were leading and then they were leading and then we were leading and then they were leading and then we were leading.
It was little different at the back, as Mapfre and Dongfeng were locked in a 6,000-mile duel. While in the middle, Brunel took a big gamble that went sour, leaving Axo Noble, Scallywag and Turn the Tide on Plastic to lead the charge to the leg finish. where an Auckland upset was in store.
It's going to be a challenge to get in good shape to the north of New Zealand, and then the last 200 miles in look very light.
As the fleet closed in, his predictions came good and the racing got unbearably close. Akso Nobel and Song Hung Kai Scallywag continued their private battle.
I think we'd be more than happy to take a second and run away and hide, because it's been a horrific leg, this one.
It's all pretty close after 21 days at sea.
But in the Franco-Spanish duel, the French skipper was confused.
Fighting together again since day one. I don't know who is the mouse, who is the cat.
And in the middle, D. Kafari's turn the tide on plastic was being squeezed as they defended their third place, and the pressure was showing.
At one stage a few hours ago I thought it was going to be tears before bedtime, but the nightmare is over my shoulder where we've got Dongfeng and Mapfre now breathing down our necks. From being 120 miles behind, they've just caught up, the weather's played to their advantage. You know, for me it's all about getting the result we deserve, and if it goes the wrong way, I'll be absolutely gutted.
Words that would haunt her later. As the breeze filled in, the story became one of heroes and heartbreak by the finish. Akso Nobel took the win.
Even this morning, you know, we had a couple of lead changes. Unbelievable crew work. I'm unbelievable proud of the crew, and they did such a fantastic job, and we managed to be 1.5 miles in front and finish the leg.
By just 12 minutes over Scallywag.
Hats off to Akso Nobel. They sailed really, really well. We put out much pressure as we could on for 3 weeks, and they stood strong.
The crushing blow came in the last few miles as Mapfre and Dongfeng forced their way through to push Kafari's team into 5th. The crew on the blue boat were distraught, their skipper struggling to find the right words.
We're pretty gutted, and you can tell by the fact that nobody stood along the deck. I don't actually even know what to say. Gutted. We had a good race. We thought we were going to have a better result, but those pesky red boats always seem to get it their way.
While clearly relieved at coming 4th, Caudrelier felt their pain.
Sorry for Turn the Tide, because they did a fantastic race and I think they deserve the 3rd place, but that's sailing.
There was more stress to come, as light winds saw a drifting match for the import racing. The tension built once more the following week as teams headed off on the longest and most intimidating leg of the race, back into the Southern Ocean and around Cape Horn. Behind the dockside smiles and away from the Auckland buzz, anxiety was building among the Volvo Ocean Race crews. The mood was changing. The fleet was now halfway around the world, and the race had intensified. The favourites were no longer dominant, as Mapfre's points lead withered. Tension was building. With more than half the available points on the table and double points for the next leg from New Zealand to Brazil, plus a bonus point for the first boat to round Cape Horn, the race for overall victory was back on.
So now it comes down to the people and the mindset, and who's good under pressure and who's not, and who's got pressure more importantly and who hasn't.
But the pressure in Auckland was about more than just points. The next 7,000 miles would be the toughest of the race, and everyone knew it.
Really, it's the leg that the Volvo Ocean race has been defined by. It's also no secret that we're actually getting quite late in the season for rounding the Horn. Potentially the weather's getting worse, certainly the low pressures are getting a bit more frequent and a bit more potent, so certainly in this race, when we're rounding the Horn as late as we are, it'll be really nice to get round.
It's a massive landmark leg. Not everyone makes it, and I think historically we know that boats have perished, sailors have perished, and you know the lucky ones get round, and so far my luck's been going quite well, and I just hope it holds out.
Since the first race back in 1973, the Southern Ocean has been the focus of attention for sailors and followers alike. The ocean wasteland at the bottom of the world has always had a fearsome reputation. And in 45 years, nothing has changed. Big waves, serious breeze, and cold are the norm. The start was a familiar affair, as the fleet completed the inshore course before heading out into open water. The big leg was underway, and the reality of the task ahead was starting to sink in.
I don't think you can ever really be ready for 6 days or whatever it's going to be driving in a row, so we're all going to be pretty broken by the time we get there, but it'll be good fun.
5 days in, and the fleet began to zigzag its way along the boundary set by the race organisers to keep the fleet north of any ice. The pace was blistering, the manoeuvres relentless, and the weather brutal. Striking the right balance between speed and safety was stressful.
The problem is not the average wind, it's the clouds, the strong wind, the gust. And when you have 40 knots, you know what sail to use. And then you have a gust to 55 and you have too much sail and you have to react.
But the weather had more in store.
As expected, wind's building now into 35 to 40 knots. It's pretty solid basically, right on the limit, survival conditions.
Reports of huge seas, big winds, major squalls, damaged sails and fatigued crew became commonplace. Among them, the series leader.
Well, we just had a problem on board, just preparing the gybe when we were reefing, going for the second reef before the gybe, as we've been doing just to be as safe as possible. The mast track came undone and glue, pretty much what happened to Axo during a gybe in leg 3.
Then, tragedy.
So I'm very saddened to let you know that we have probably lost one of our crew members in the Volvo Ocean race, John Fisher.
On day 9, 1,300 miles west of Cape Horn, Sun Hung Kai Scallywag reported a man overboard. Sailing in 35 to 40 knots of wind and in 6-metre seas, the boat had crash-jibed after surfing down the face of a wave. As the boat spun around and laid flat, crew member John Fisher was knocked overboard. He was wearing full survival gear, yet despite retracing their track and conducting an extensive search, the Scallywag team were unable to find their crew member. The loss was devastating and sent shockwaves throughout the fleet.
Southern Ocean this week claimed a good man in fish, and you know, from myself and I know everyone on board here were very deeply affected by it, and offer our thoughts to the family.
It's absolutely devastating for everyone on board, and obviously morale's down, and we can't imagine the pain that they're all going through, and so you know, our thoughts are really first and foremost with those guys, and you know, the racing is really secondary at this point.
Emotions were raw. Messages of support from home carried an even greater poignancy. For some, it was hard to hold back.
Nearly at the turning point of this race, which I'm really looking forward to getting to. I think everyone is. It's cold and horrible, and it'll be really nice to get there, and can't wait to see everyone in Brazil.
But the weather wasn't giving up as the fleet ran headlong towards the most notorious and feared headland of them all, Cape Horn. The pressure was going to build even further as this brutal leg played out. Stay with us to find out how. Stress, wild weather, and tragedy had characterised leg 7 of the Volvo Ocean race from Auckland to Itajaí, Brazil. Having snatched an early lead in the leg, Brunel were first around the infamous landmark, Cape Horn.
This leg was really hard. I think one of the hardest I've ever done, and I've been there 8 times before. See the horn, and you can just see it on the faces of the crew. Finally, they're coming from smiles appearing on the faces again.
There were no smiles aboard Mapfre. Having nursed their rig through the Southern Ocean, the damaged mast track eventually gave way, ripping the mainsail and causing even more damage to the mast. A pit stop was essential. Others were also facing problems.
The frontal system turned us into the waves and they're massive and
Clearly we've dropped off one and the rig's not very happy. And now Liz has got the unenviable task of going up there to find out what the problem is.
Okay, found part of the problem. Spreader 2, starboard side. The spreader root looks like it's threaded. I found the problem!
Kafari's crew had been lucky. They'd saved their mast and had managed to fix the problem. But on the same day, Vestas 11th Hour Racing had been less fortunate. Shortly after celebrating their rounding of the Horn, disaster struck.
We were routing at about 75 true wind angle in about 30 knots of breeze, and there was a big bang and the rig broke just above the first spreader.
A crushing blow to a team that had been forced out of yet another leg of the race. Motoring the 100 nautical miles to the Falkland Islands gave the crew time to reflect.
I think that it just tells the story. This race is about overcoming the difficulties. We can't really overcome this one now, but we can make a plan to go forward and try our hardest to keep in the race.
Axo Nobel was also fighting to stay in the hunt after discovering a potentially serious leak in the keel area.
Right, so I'm going to go down here.
Just went down, checked the keel. There's two cover plates for the keel box, the wet box. The front half of our port ones has snapped off completely. So there's a gaping hole about that big in the bottom of our boat.
Meanwhile, the race at the front of the fleet had intensified. Brunel's lead was under threat from Dongfeng as the pair headed north towards the finish at Itajaye.
Of course we want to win. Not only me, everybody likes to win it.
We are fighting for the first place with Brunel, but we don't have to forget that the boat is tired, the people are tired, and the biggest mistake we could do would be to push too much to try to win this leg.
As the breeze dropped, the battle between the pair became a needle match, placing even greater stress on the already exhausted crew. But Becking's team held its nerve. After more than 2 weeks of leading the fleet and covering almost 7,800 miles, they had sealed victory, albeit by less than 15 minutes.
There's been a really tough leg, I think, especially emotional, of course, with the loss of John. That sits really, really deep, and I think especially as being a skipper, you're just feeling all that responsibility for your crew members and the family members at home. But we won, and now all of a sudden the scoreboard looks a little bit more in our favour.
Cordrelier's Dongfeng team had been looking for a win. Yet, with Mapfre finishing 5th, second place put Dongfeng at the top of the overall rankings. Leg 7 had been brutal, and the scoreboard reordered. Yet as they set foot ashore, every crew member aboard every team was acutely aware of the price that one sailor had paid. 6 months after the start of the race, with 11,000 miles to go, crews have been pushed to their limits and beyond. Having burned more calories than they could possibly consume, many were running on empty. Now leading the race, Dongfeng needed to ensure that their team was fit enough for the big push north, but how? Stay with us to find out. Freeze-dried food for weeks on end. It's a love-hate relationship.
Pasta Provençal, the lunch, and chili con carne for dinner.
After 1 week or 10 days, you will eat the same thing again.
Every day.
You had it, and also the taste, especially for me, is terrible.
Must remember not to put the water in too early on the pasta Provençal because it gets a bit gluggy. I think a 30-minute preparation time will be sufficient for that one. Chili con carne though likes a little bit longer, maybe an hour, otherwise the beans get a bit dusty. Don't like dusty beans.
I never want to see this one again.
I would actually say some of these meals I would order if I was out at a restaurant. They're that good.
Love it or hate it, all develop cravings.
Beer and a steak generally is the first thing on the mind.
You can't beat a
a bunch of fresh fruit, and and then moving into the steak. And Brazil's a great place for getting a good steak on that first night.
In addition to cravings, leg 7 had left crews running on empty.
The Volvo Ocean race, mentally and physically, it tears your body apart. During the race you will never gain any muscle or any strength or any endurance.
Arriving here was the most broken I've been. I was 17 days of just pure abuse.
This is where you start seeing teams getting tired. The 3 most important months of the race are ahead of us. This point of the race is where the survival of the fittest starts.
None of this was a surprise to the new race leaders.
What I say to the team from Auckland onwards, it would be the land of opportunity or the beginning of the nightmare.
And the Dongfeng race team had planned for this in great detail.
We highlighted this leg as the absolute focus, arriving from Auckland into Itajai on a successful, positive note. And we knew that if we could be on the upslope at this point, we would be on a very positive path to the end of this race.
Now with a 1-point lead, 11,000 miles of racing ahead, and 1/3 of the points still on the table, getting back in shape was crucial.
We take a lot of physiological measurements. We do obviously body weight, we do hydration levels when they arrive. We look at limb circumferences, and then we look at the skin fold measurements. And with that, you get a very good understanding of how the body's actually changed. But what we're seeing is actually, compared to the last race, we're seeing some really good stability in our numbers. So we obviously have baseline figures, and we have acceptable margins that we know that we can play with, and we know we can bring the guys back from. And the underlying principle, the goal from the beginning of this campaign, was to really try and minimise this accepted deterioration. This idea that these guys have to arrive at the finish line physiologically broken, and we wanted to challenge that from the start.
The crew's recovery programme started as the lines went ashore.
So typically we have 2 or 3 days of a little bit of gentle sort of a landing protocol, whereby we do a lot of injury assessment, we do all the measurements, we listen to the guys, we do some menu planning for the next leg, and we give them a little bit of time and space. One of the aspects that's been really good for us is actually having a chef that's worked with us from the very beginning of this project and is accompanying us all the way around this tour.
What I like to do when they just arrive is try to find nice pastry or this kind of stuff. It's really when they arrive on the dock that I'm gonna be the first who give them something nice to eat.
But the chef's duties extend beyond just the sailors.
We have all the support team, we have the technical part, the performance, the logistics, the communication, everyone. It's like a little company. My day when they do the refit is 5:30 start, 6:30 breakfast. They still think I'm doing magic. But I'm not doing magic. Sometimes, yes, but just with the chocolate cake.
Meanwhile, in the team container, a different kind of food preparation.
We're putting all the individual food programs together this week. The sailors come in and we work through the individual packing per day. So we have all 18 days for the next leg, everything laid out, and we run it through the spreadsheet to know exactly what they're consuming. You know, the trick for this one is to put it in your freeze-dried.
Yeah, okay.
With a week to go and the crew on the mend, the gym sessions start.
Working through, 2 to go. Yeah, go on. Yeah, finish strong.
There's no point in going hard in the gym 2 days after you've arrived from a 20-day leg. When we arrive, our blood is taken, and from our blood tests they can see how much recovery we need. We start very slowly, generally a week after you've come back on shore. Then we get into some weight work, some strength work in the gym. It's not to try and build something, but it's just to try and maintain what you've built previously.
As soon as you get a mismatch between nutrition and the tasks on board, you're burning fuses, you're burning matches, and they'll soon be out of energy, and that's what we really want to try and avoid. And we may feel like we're almost there, 1 long leg to go, and then the transat and a couple of shorter legs, but there's still 1/3 of the points to go. And we're still very conscious of that fact that there's only 1 point between us and Mapfre, and everything is to play for, and we have to keep striving and trying to thrive in this environment.
The physical stress of the south was behind them. But the pressure of going north was lying in wait as the Volvo Ocean race fleet prepared for the 5,600-mile leg from Itajaí to Newport. On the overall scoreboard, the tables had turned. The race had a new leader. And with 1 point between first and second, both teams were feeling the heat. Dongfeng were confident that they'd planned for every eventuality, including how to deal with the mental pressure.
It's a new dimension about a modern approach of sports and maybe sailing. My first job is to understand what happened during the leg, and after that I try to coach them individually or to keep a better relationship between some guys, because with the fatigue and the goal that we have to win the race, we have a lot of pressure. It's not an individual race, so you have to change sometimes your mind and your way of compete.
To look at the weather, the team had hired one of the world's leading experts.
Yeah, so I typically come in a week before and basically I prepare it as if I would be sailing myself. So I try to make sure that everything that can be prepared on the navigational department is done, which can be a lot, like notice of mariners, the charting, the sailing instructions, any changes to the notice of race, all the regulations bits basically. Then I also start looking at the weather, long term, and sort of get a plan for at least the first few days. Once they get out there, they already have a good plan in their head of what's going to happen. So at least they don't have the danger of being sort of caught off guard early on. It's a long and complicated leg, and although physically it won't be that hard, I think mentally it can be quite draining.
But it wasn't just the teams that were feeling the pressure. To finish first, you have to finish. And the boats were feeling the strain. No one could afford a breakdown.
Most teams at this stage has, you can say the pressure on them, because either if you're in front of the fleet right now, you're in a risk of the wheels coming off and you lose everything in these last legs, and there is pressure on everyone. If you're at the back of the fleet, it's time to start performing, it's time to put some good efforts in, so everyone's got pressure on. And you will see teams where the wheels comes off, or you'll see teams where they can keep it together and they finish the race strong and climb up the ladder board.
Closely fought start. The first to suffer a breakdown were the race leaders. Mapfre, after an electrical failure, left them without power.
Right now the biggest problem we're trying to solve is the PLC, because we cannot control the keel.
Eventually, a fix was found, for the keel at least. 9 days in, and with the fleet around the Brazilian coast, the drag race to Newport began, as Brunel demonstrated that their dominant performance in leg 7 was no fluke. Hot on Brunel's heels, Dongfeng was holding on to second. With Mapfre back in 6th, this was good news for the Franco-Chinese team. Meanwhile, seaweed provided a game of chance for all.
We've started getting into all of the sargasso seaweed, and that's all the kind of this brown spiky seaweed that we see everywhere. And when there's not a lot of wind, it means you're ending up with quite a lot of drag for your speed going forwards. So not going forwards fast enough to blow it off.
And the only really way to get it off is to physically stop the boat and make the boat sail in reverse.
Not quick, but the dice would be rolled several times more come the finish.
Brunel very close, Vestas very close, and it will be a nightmare up to Newport. The 2 last 100 miles will be very stressful.
As the fleet raced towards Newport, the competition closed up.
We were hoping just to get to 4th. Right now we're up to 3rd and Dongfeng not far away. I think we're very happy getting a 3rd out of it, and we're not out the woods with Vestas yet by any means, so things change.
And they did. As the tide turned against the leaders, the pack was about to be shuffled once again. Mapfre had come from behind to overtake Dongfeng in the closing miles to the finish. Dongfeng was now under pressure from Vestas. As the fog shrouded the action, spaghetti-like tracks looked like the fleet had lost its way. Dongfeng had lost their battle with Vestas, as Mapfre and Brunel ghosted towards the finish. 31 hours before, Mapfre had been in 5th, 53 miles behind the leader. But in the last 500 metres, they had taken the lead. Brunel had been robbed.
Yeah, result is maybe not what we had hoped for, but yeah, second place, and especially if you get past in the last 0.3 of a mile before the finish, that's really sour. But yeah, sailing can be sometimes really cruel, and today we're on the receiving end.
The last 48 hours they've been good for us. We had the opportunity which we took very well in 2 nights ago, where we push a lot in the storm and we catch up enough to then be able to be with the leaders today.
Behind them, Vestas had taken third, leaving Dongfeng to cross the Newport finish in fourth, a crushing blow. In less than 4 hours, they'd been knocked off the podium. They had lost their overall lead.
It's far from finish and many things can happen, so we have to work again, come back from this bad result and fight the hunger to have a revenge on the next one.
They say the good never give up. Mapfre hadn't, and were back in the overall lead, leaving Dongfeng to play catch-up once again on the double points transatlantic leg to Cardiff. The race across the Atlantic was fast, record-breaking fast, but the ride had come at a price. Broken gear, damaged pride, stress, flat calms, and yet another shake-up on the leaderboard. Leg 9 of the Volvo Ocean race had it all.
Three, two, one, now.
As the fleet set out from Newport, Rhode Island for the 3,300-mile transatlantic leg to Cardiff, the end of the race was sliding into view. From Cardiff, 2 short legs remained before the winner could be crowned. Yet the points gap was closing. Time was running out. At the Newport start, the battle between Dongfeng and Mapfre was still raging. But Baubeking's Brunel was now putting serious pressure on the favourites. One day into the leg, the weather forecast looked set to split the fleet. Teams had to decide on their route.
There's 2 options: either you take a southerly route towards the Gulf Stream, or you take the shortcut going up north direction Nova Scotia, and I think that was the decider probably already of the leg.
We were leading the race when we decided to go north. We thought everybody was going north. It was a mistake, and we have not really no wind in the north, and the other one were going full speed.
We were lucky that the split was there, that the 2 boats who were ahead of us took the wrong route, and we took the right route.
You can't afford to make, tactical mistakes, and we have had a couple of moments where we've just gone the wrong way, just got the wrong side of something, and suddenly you're 10 or 20 behind, and then that's it. There's no way back.
And then another surprise, as conditions lined up for a record-breaking run. Brunel were the first to set a new 24-hour distance record, twice. But Axo Nobel were going even quicker.
We knocked out a 602 nautical miles in 24 hours, which to me was unachievable. I remember when the guys said from down below, yeah, we broke 600, I kind of called, nah, not true. You need to go back down and double check, triple check.
He's got a 24-hour record.
It was pretty special. Everything lined up just perfectly. Boat, crew, weather, waves, current, wind, you name it, it was all there in place.
After riding a punchy weather front for 6 days, the wind shut down on the fleet. Two days later, the breeze switched off once again, this time within striking distance of the finish. Caudrelier's Dongfeng were among those that had parked up.
Allez, come on, we need some wind.
And the tension was starting to show.
I lost 2 Figaro in this kind of bay. Arriving a leader and finishing 25, lost 3 hours.
While the pressure from behind was intense, there was relief ahead for Brunel as they took the leg win.
We're tremendously happy, but I think most important is that we sailed again a very good leg. We're here for racing, we want to win this race, and it's going the right way, how we like to see it.
Behind them, Akzo Nobel finished second, with Dongfeng finishing third. Caudrelier's team were now back in the overall lead. The relief was clear to see.
It's not too bad, it's a very short lead and it's far from finish for us.
Meanwhile, stress aboard Mapfre, who crossed the line in fifth.
It's been not an easy leg for us, it's been painful from day one basically, and we never could catch up. But you know, it's not much more we could do, and of course we'll fight it all the way to the end.
The overall scores had been shuffled once again. 3 teams separated by 3 points, with just 2 legs left to run. The pressure was back on. The next leg from Cardiff to Gothenburg would be a sprint, 1,300 miles around the top of the UK. So, what was the plan?
Not a red boat, there is not a yellow boat, there is just opponents. All the boats are grey and we have to sail against everybody and be ahead of everybody. And I prefer this situation than when you think too much about one boat. It's not usually when you do big mistake.
It's a different leg though. It is a 5 days leg, but it's almost a coastal leg where you have a lot of turning points, a lot of straight headings to stick to, and hopefully it's I wouldn't say easier or simpler, but maybe a little bit more straightforward.
I think we just take it on the horns and just sail whatever we think in the beginning part, what is the best. Just sail the boat at a maximum speed and believe the direction where you're going.
While the skippers were playing it cool, every team knew that the line between success and defeat was finer than ever. Leg 10 from Cardiff to Gothenburg didn't need any pre-start hype. Just 3 points separated the top 3 boats. Just 1,300 miles lay ahead, a coastal sprint in Volvo terms. The start would be critical. Gaining a jump on the fleet would deliver an enviable advantage, and all the teams knew it.
Beat the 2 red boats and then we're getting closer.
So maybe we play a bit too much match racing with Mapfre.
We'll try to start strong and keep the whole leg pushing the whole way.
I've been running around all Cardiff trying to work out how I get 10,000 quid on Bowie to win the race. No one wants to take the bet.
Come the start, the weather threw in a curveball and did nothing to calm nerves. 24 hours later, Dongfeng had taken the lead as the fleet tiptoed past the Fastnet Rock off Ireland's southern coast. The next stage to Scotland was bittersweet. The breeze was in, the boat speeds up, but the options to overtake had reduced. Dongfeng had pulled back to second. With Mapfre still leading, the pair looked set to arrive in Gothenburg as joint leaders overall. And if they did, ultimate victory in the 45,000-mile Volvo Ocean race could come down to the final 700-mile leg. But then, the tables turned. On the drag race to the finish in Gothenburg, Brunel started a charge to the front, while Dongfeng slipped back through the pack. And after a high-speed blast across the North Sea, Becking's crew delivered another impressive leg win, their third of the race.
The breeze started picking up close to 40 knots, and I think the sail what we had was probably nearly brand new, and that's probably what the difference was, probably in the boat speed, because we know new sails is normally pretty fast in one design. So in that sense, thank you to the new J2.
Mapfre was second.
It's just a little bit painful how we lost. Last night these guys came a bit quicker than us, so we tried to hold them as much as possible, but they managed to pass, and then that was it.
With Dongfeng languishing in fourth.
Sail well, but not enough to win a leg, so maybe we don't take enough risk also, I don't know. But we need to take on the next one, because I think on the next one we have no choice, we have to be ahead of the 2 boats.
Caudrelier's team were expected to take the bonus point for the best elapsed time throughout the race. All 3 boats were now on even points going into the last 700-mile leg to The Hague. A nail-biting 3-way shootout was in store for the closest final in the history of the race. In the chase for overall victory, Brunel's newfound performance, Dongfeng's predicted bonus point, and Mapfre's drop in pace had all added up to 1 point. After 43,000 miles, 3 boats were on equal points, with just 1 leg to go to the finish. The Volvo Ocean race had never been closer. After 8 months of racing, victory would come down to a 970-mile coastal sprint.
It's an incredible situation for the race because I think these 3 teams have done a fantastic job and give a fantastic fight on the water.
I think that's something what we know that especially one particular red boat, they're getting very nervous.
So I'm very happy to be part of one of the 3. It would be very hard for me if we were out of the fight. So happy from there.
The final leg took the fleet from Gothenburg to The Hague in the Netherlands via several turning points along the way. After a tricky start, the first 12 hours presented several passing lanes as the fleet sailed upwind towards the Norwegian coast. Dongfeng rounded the mark at the head of the fleet, followed by Mapfre, who, after starting in last place, had hauled themselves through the fleet. The next mark of the course took the fleet south to the Danish city of Aarhus. In front of thousands of spectators, Dongfeng rounded this turning point ahead of Mapfre, but this time by just minutes. As the fleet headed back to the north, light and shifty conditions slowed the pace and piled on yet more pressure before stronger winds filled in. The route headed south once again, but this time teams had to negotiate the maze of shipping exclusion zones to get to the finish at The Hague. Among the many tactical decisions ahead, there was one key issue to consider: whether to go to the west or the east of the zones. There was no middle ground. With less than 400 miles to run, the fleet split into 2 groups. To the west, Mapfre led the charge, while Dongfeng kept close to the coast.
We've chosen a path inshore, so it's a lot of very tricky navigation. We've got all sorts of sandbanks and traffic separation schemes and some very changeable weather. So I suspect no one's going to get any rest tonight. It's going to be a very busy night, changing sails and just navigating our way through it all.
It didn't take long before Dongfeng's gamble looked risky as the rankings dropped them towards the back of the fleet. After 12 hours, they were almost 50 miles behind their arch rivals Brunel and Mapfre.
That is a bit crazy. We are sailing than 9 months, racing than 9 months. And it's only the 40 last miles of the last leg is going to decide who is going to win the Volvo Ocean race. It's crazy.
But as the breeze died offshore, Dongfeng hauled themselves back into the race and into the lead. By the final turning mark, just 5 miles from the finish, Caudrelier's team were back on top. And this time, nothing would stop them winning.
First time I cry for a race, I think. I've been crying a lot since the finishing line, and it's the first time of my life I cry for that. I'm so sad for the other one. I'm so sad for Shabby because it's a good friend, and I know how much it costs to do this race to a skipper. And this is I think about him, and also about Bo, who did a fantastic comeback, and but this is the race.
We went the wrong way. Very simple. Dongfeng went the right way, but we actually expected that Mapfre would go that way as well. But then they choose our way. It wasn't until 20 miles before the finish that we knew most likely we're not gonna beat Dongfeng. Did it, and they won the race. So congratulations to them.
By the finish, Team Axo Nobel had slipped into second, leaving Mapfre in third, resulting in a second place in the overall standings. Baubecking and Team Brunel were fourth into The Hague to grab the final podium place on the overall race leaderboard. So after 45,000 miles, the 13th edition of the famous ocean race had been decided in the last 5 months. Outright victory had gone to the team that had only won one of the 11 offshore legs, but in the end, it was the one that counted.
To win the ocean race is
something I couldn't imagine. But the pressure, I have less pressure on this leg than the other one. We were relaxed, we saw it at the beginning, and for the first time we follow our first choice and we win.